Thanks for joining the breakdown. I'm James Sayer, and tonight, finally, we're going to talk about consciousness. We're calling this Confronting Consciousness because that's what we've done. We've confronted it far more extensively than we ever intended, and we're pretty excited about what we're going to talk about tonight. We hope you enjoy it. First, we want to get into defining consciousness. What do we mean when we say consciousness? Consciousness, we're defining really as your awareness of your experience, your awareness of your existence, of your internal and emotional states, as well as your awareness of your physical existence in the world. So internal and external knowledge and feelings, perception of your existence, and feelings and thoughts, and an awareness of that. That is what we define as consciousness. So we're looking at this from a bunch of different perspectives tonight. We're going to look at it from the human perspective, the human brain, but we're also going to look at some other stuff as far as look at the different animals and some other stuff regarding plants as well, and some other concepts. But so let's just get started from the scientific aspect regarding the human brain. What do we know just in general about consciousness? Neuroscience has only been a formal field of study for about 55 years or so. So it's still a pretty new field, and really serious scientific study of the brain, physiologically has only been around for 200 years tops. With the most serious stuff done in the most recently, obviously. But there's still so much to learn. They have pretty reliably determined that the seat of consciousness exists back here in what they call the posterior hot zone, or the posterior cortex, and it's just in the back here in the back of your head, the upper layer, and it's one of the more modern portions of the brain. The whole cortex, the prefrontal cortex, is a modern part, but also back here is a modern part as well. And they have determined through a bunch of different experiments with magnetic probes and things, where they can do a magnetic pulse and generate in your consciousness images or sounds or different colors and things that your consciousness immediately perceives when it pulses a magnetic pulse in these areas in the posterior hot zone of your posterior cortex. Also the prefrontal cortex is here up in the front. It's an advanced part of the brain that's relatively new. It's associated with all kinds of high-level executive functions, like controlling language, speech, and a whole other types of decision-making, but it's actually not involved with consciousness. They've done the same thing with magnetic pulses to the prefrontal cortex, and it doesn't appear to affect consciousness at all. It's involved in mental processing, but does not appear to be at least directly related to your awareness of your existence. That's happening back here. This is where the game is, back here, for the most part. Now, they also think that a number of scientists think that the thalamus is also involved to some degree with arousal and arousing consciousness in the posterior cortex. Anyway, there's two main theories going. The big popular ones in neuroscience right now, and one is called the Global Neuronal Workspace, GNW. Okay, and basically what it posits is that consciousness arises when information is shared across multiple systems, shared between multiple systems, and that is when consciousness arises. So when multiple systems within your brain are sharing information between each other, that is when when consciousness actually occurs within your brain. That's their theory in a nutshell. The other theory is the IIT, integrated information theory. And basically that theory in a nutshell is, okay, that consciousness arises from the complexity and interconnectivity of activity in the posterior cortex. So the more interconnected the activity, the more complex the activity, the higher level of consciousness will occur. And that if you have a system that's set up to have like a cause and effect relationship, that will ultimately lead to some level of consciousness. Now it's interesting. Not all neuroscientists believe this, but a lot of neuroscientists do believe that they will be able to eventually create artificial intelligence, consciousness, from a manufactured that we can create a machine that can eventually become conscious. That they believe eventually someday, not anytime soon, but maybe 50, 100 years from now, maybe less, who knows. They believe this, not all of them, but a growing number of them do believe that if they can come to fully understand the structure and chemistry of the brain, that one, they'll be able to predict. If they could perfectly understand the chemistry and structure of your brain, they'll be able to predict, in theory, what you can do. Two is that they can reverse engineer that and build, based on the conscious structure of the brain, build a manufactured brain to mimic that and to create a consciousness from a structure similar to ours. Who knows if that's possible? That's a theory. That's just what a lot of them think right now, but not all of them believe that. There are some neuroscientists who aren't convinced of that. But there's still a lot to learn. But right now, the evidence is those are the two big popular theories going in neuroscience right now. But that's human behavior, and we know that there are other animals. We can see. We not only do we know we're conscious, but we can observe consciousness in others. And not only can we observe consciousness in other people, right, and identify that by their behavior and relate that behavior to ours and make that distinction between ourself and others within the world separate from us, that we both have consciousness. We can make that determination. And we can also make that determination about animals too. More and more, we're aware that not only are animals aware that they're alive and that they make choices, but that more and more we're beginning to verify that more animals are conscious of their experience. They're not just sensing things, but that they're thinking about things, they're experiencing emotions, they're planning, they're using tools, they have relationships, even social contracts, between groups and between individuals. We've seen a lot of this, obviously, very well documented with the primates, with different apes and gorillas and monkeys, that they can use tools and communicate, and have like apes. Sometimes when they lose a baby, they'll make a doll and hold that, and appear very much so to be, emotionally very distraught and grieving, and will hold that for a time. Fashion, as what looks like a doll, and use that as like a grieving tool. We've seen, lots of apes use different sticks as spears to fight each other and hunt. Different primates hunt each other, but also sticks to hunt with things. Gorillas use stumps to throw in the water as like bridges, and the whole chimpanzees have a whole set of toolkits they use for a wide different set of tasks. But we also see that dolphins use tools, and dolphins have been well established to be highly intelligent. That they'll pick up sponges and use a sponge in its snout to clean off the sea floor to find prey on the bottom of of the ocean. And they could do a whole bunch of other stuff with a wide range of different tools. That's just one example. But they've also found, they've determined that birds, who we used to think were very stupid, there's a lot of them that are highly intelligent. We're talking about crows, ravens, different birds in the jay family, parrots, magpies. They've all been shown to be able to, that they have social relationships and can carry out different planning strategies and solve complex problems and use tools as well in all types of different experiments and observational behavior. That's been pretty well established over the last 20 plus years. More recently now, they've begun to establish a lot more evidence arguing for the sentience, the conscious awareness of a lot of fish in the ocean. That just in February of this year, they confirmed that, I think, was it February? As the cleaner wrasse, they in an experiment identified itself, passed what they call the mirror test, which has typically been what they use to determine if an animal is self-aware, meaning aware. So there's two concepts here in self-awareness. There's self-recognition and there's self-awareness. Self-awareness means that you're aware of your physical space in the world, in relation to the world, and you're also aware of your internal mental and emotional state. Self-recognition just means you're aware of yourself in the world. You can recognize your appearance, but you don't necessarily have any awareness of your internal mental state. So anyway, that's the distinction between self-awareness and self-recognition. Anyway, the cleaner wrasse in an experiment clearly recognized itself in the mirror. When they put a fluid like in its throat, non-toxic fluid in its throat, and it recognized it, thinking it was something that needed to be cleaned off, it would rub itself up against different surfaces to try to rub it off, go back to the mirror and look at itself again. Now, some people dispute that and think that's not necessarily an indication of self-awareness, that it's an indication of self-recognition, perhaps, but perhaps not even that some people posit that it was looking in the mirror thinking that the fish was someone else. But most researchers are convinced that the fish, after looking at the mirror, trying to clean itself off by moving itself around, then going back to the mirror and checking again, is a confirmation of recognition of self, that it recognizes itself separate from other fish in the world. Okay, that's pretty interesting. There's a lot of other animals that have passed the self-recognition test. Toddlers can do it. Human toddlers can do it, but also they've done it with like different apes, and I think supposedly there's a number of different animals that have passed it as well. I think certain types of birds, I think, have also, dolphins have also passed it. That means something, that you recognize yourself, you can make a connection, but there's some question as to what that truly is measuring. But that is something of a benchmark, and that is telling us that cleaner wrasse, that fish are way smarter than we used to think. And there used to be this belief that fish had like a 2 or 3 second memory, and that's been debunked roundly. They've done a number of different experiments to confirm that there's a wide number of fish that can remember different escape routes and different hunting routes for over weeks. And in one experiment, there was a group of fish that were able to remember a feeding tube, the specific feeding tube they were in by its color, a year after, when it was an experiment. The first part of the experiment was part one was here, and then a year later was part two when they brought the fish back in. In part one, they brought the fish back in and had them assigned to a feeding tube by color, right? And then when they brought them back in a year later, they mixed the veterans in with the newbie group And the veterans who were marked for the researchers to identify all found their feeding tubes immediately, the same feeding tubes they used from a year before. So we've established there's a lot of other experiments to establish they do have a long memory. They can also solve problems. There's evidence that they could plan in creating the types of nests that they do. That they experience pain. They've confirmed in numerous experiments with rainbow fish and trout and other fish that they can experience pain, that they don't like it, that it causes stress hormones in their brain and in their body, and that they seek to avoid what they associate with that pain for considerable time later, so that they actually, not only did they feel that pain, but they remember the pain much later and seek to avoid it. All right. So we know that fish are way more advanced, or at least certain types of fish are way more advanced than we previously thought, and that they have relationships, and it may be a much more complex mental life than we originally perceived. And I think a lot of people think that fish are just going around like, and there's nothing going on there. But it appears that there's a lot more going on there than that. That they have very active lives, very active social lives, and that they're using all of their different faculties. I mean, the tigerfish can actually hunt sparrows from the water. They can use different hunting strategies to shoot up and snatch out fast, agile sparrows out of the air. They can shoot out of the water, snatch them. Anglerfish they squirt water out of their mouths in a number of different ways. They can do it. They can modulate the amount of water they use depending on the type of prey. They hunt a lot of different things, like a lot of different insects. But they've been known to hunt lizards too. They can blast, depending on the size of the prey, they're going to modulate the amount of water that they shoot out of their mouth to hit their prey on the leaf or the twig above the water, knock them into the water, boom, and snatch their food. All right, a fish can do that. And they can do it a rapid fire, like a machine gun. They can do it in a bunch of different ways too. There's a whole bunch of crazy stuff like that. And the cleaner wrasse can also, some would argue it's tool use, some wouldn't, that if it wants to open a clam to eat it, it can take it in its mouth and it cracks it open on a rock. If it gets a pellet, a feeding pellet that's too big to fit it in its mouth, it can pick it up. It can pick it up and it can crack it on a rock and break it down to a small enough chunk to be able to eat it. Actually, I think it might have been a tusk fish that was actually cracking the clam open. But both the tusk fish and the clam can crack stuff open to get at it, and they could crack it open on a rock. Obviously, it's not tool use because they don't have hands to make tools, but they got their mouth and they're using it they're cracking it open. So there's some strategy going on there. Anyway, there's a lot more going on with fish. Now to insects. They used to think insects are not conscious, but they've confirmed in experiments with fruit flies, in particular, that, for example, fruit flies experience pain. Not only do they experience pain, but they remember pain, and they later they seek to avoid pain much later. Similar to what I was talking about with fish, is that if there's a stimuli that they associated with pain in one of their limbs earlier, they seek to avoid that. And not only that previous limb seeks to avoid it, but all the other limbs. And a number of different insects, like spiders, have been shown to be able to plan, to be able to count, and to be able to do a number of obviously their webs are extremely complex, and that in observing them, they've determined, some scientists have come to the conclusion in observing how they make their webs, that they're not doing it on some kind of genetic autopilot, that they're having to constantly reevaluate as they build the web and they adapt the web to the real environment that they're in, that they're constantly having to make adjustments to their work, and that requires a certain awareness and strategic planning ability that nobody ever really thought bugs had. But we can see, like with honeybees can solve problems, and they can communicate the solution to other honeybees. They've also established that honeybees too can feel pain. That not only, when I mean they feel pain, not only do they sense it, but they react negatively to it, and they remember that pain and seek to avoid it, and can show, negative reactions, and certain stress hormones are released when they do experience pain, and so there's more evidence to support the idea that a lot of insects are conscious as well. That they have some kind of internal mental life, and even though they have small brains, they have small bodies. They don't need as much. They don't need as much as many neurons to manipulate their tiny body. Like, we have a much larger body. We need a lot more neurons to operate this big brain that has to control this whole body. Obviously, elephants are very intelligent. That's been known for a long time. They have long memories. They appear to show emotions and have relationships. So there are a whole host of these. They also use tools. They can throw logs and rocks over fences to knock the fence down. They can use rocks to plug water holes to keep other elephants or animals from drinking from their water holes. So there's a lot of different animals. Supposedly bears, like polar bears, have been, I don't think it's been confirmed, but some people have reported that they've seen polar bears throw rocks or chunks of ice at their prey to try and kill their prey using projectiles. So in general, it seems to be there's a lot more going on in the mental state of the animal kingdom, just in general. This has major implications, of course, for our understanding of nature, and certainly how we treat animals. Obviously, we have to survive, and we have to survive off other organic beings as they have to survive off other organic beings too. So, this isn't an argument for being a vegetarian or anything like that, or outlawing meat. But that does seem that in the long term there will be long-term implications for how we consider the ethical treatment of animals. We're obviously very protective of a lot of animals already, especially like our pets, our cats and dogs. But we may have to start taking into consideration, welcoming other members into the family as well, like fish, and perhaps to some degree even insects. Although, mosquitoes, spiders, ants, you got to do what you got to do. But they may be aware of their experience and have some mental life that's far more advanced than we think it is. So a lot more will have to be determined in the coming years as more research is done. Part of the problem is there's not that much research going on in consciousness. There's more money in other aspects of neuroscience, like neuroeconomics. So I think if they could boost funding for research into the neuroscientific study of consciousness, I think we could probably discover a lot more information, because right now we're able to associate the activities. We can observe people's brains under magnetic scanners and see what parts of the brain are associated with what types of emotions and what types of activities. But we don't know a whole lot beyond that. Beyond, like we know consciousness is associated here, and that when you go to sleep, your consciousness largely takes a nap, but not entirely. It's still active, just at a lower level. That the frequency of the brain waves change, and this is the weird thing. Like when you're asleep, there's a good chunk of the time where you're not conscious. When you're dreaming is when you recover a certain amount of conscious awareness within your dream. So you are consciously aware of your surroundings within the context of that dream. It's not the same level of consciousness because you're not walking around in the world experiencing everything. You're within the context of that dream and you are aware. So it's a limited level of your consciousness that is still active while you're dreaming. When you're not dreaming, your consciousness, it's like you're dead. It is. It's like your consciousness is gone. It doesn't exist. It's like you didn't exist anymore, in a sense. It's not there. But it gets woken up. It gets stimulated by, different activity in the brain that can stimulate things. Or, that there's still some activity going on there at a low level, to some degree. But that once it reaches a certain point or threshold, that's when you become conscious of it and you begin dreaming. So there's still a lot more they need to do about that, about sleep research. But I think that a lot more, the better they come to learn about sleep, the more they'll come to understand aspects of consciousness. Also, too, when we talk about hallucinogenic drugs, in recent years, it became known in the 1950s. I mean, I think LSD was first created in the 30s, started becoming more known in the 50s, got big in the 60s. But there's a whole different group of different types of psychedelic drugs that neuroscientists and psychiatrists have found can help patients with different mental problems. It can help with therapy, with structured, in conjunction with structured therapy and monitored use, that some psychedelic drugs can help people in regulating or coming to terms with alcoholism, depression, different phobias, anxiety, a whole suite of different issues. And there hasn't been obviously a lot of funding for this research over the years because it's been illegal, although Oregon has made use of psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in what they call magic mushrooms, the hallucinogen, that has been legalized for the purpose in Oregon for treating people with certain types of mental ailments. So a lot more research will need to be done in this area, but it seems like there is some promise for the use of hallucinogenic drugs in treating people with different mental disorders. This could give us a lot more information about how consciousness works and how perception works within the brain and how it can be adjusted. And also, not only that, but how images and thoughts are created within the brain by understanding the chemistry of how these hallucinogenic drugs interact with the brain and the different types of chemical reactions and electrical activity that they cause. The more we know about that, the more we understand it, the more that will tell us about how thought and ideas and images actually originate from this activity. Give us more information and more context for understanding, okay, we know all this these electrical impulses are going through the brain all the time, right? And we know that there's all these chemical reactions going on that are, dictating things but beyond that, we don't really know what that means. But by doing this further experimentation, additional research, we may come to understand a fuller, deeper meaning how consciousness actually arises from the brain. As far as we know, consciousness, the idea of consciousness has been around for a long time. We're aware, we know we're here in the world, we exist, we feel things, we think about things, we choose, we weigh options. We know this, we know we exist. And, for millennia, since at least Aristotle, Socrates, we've been talking about consciousness and thinking about it probably long before that even. But it wasn't until the 1600s with Rene Descartes, who formalized the idea of what they call dualism. The idea that, okay, you have your brain which thinks and does all this stuff that, helps you solve problems and, control yourself and get around in the world and do what you have to do. but you also have a soul, an independent free will that is separate from your brain. And that is separate from the physical brain itself. It is not of a physical nature. And that's what they call dualism. Now, there's absolutely no physical evidence whatsoever to support the concept, unfortunately, of a soul or an independent free will at all. I mean, we all believe and feel that we have a free will. I feel that I have agency and choice, that I make decisions, and we do choose. I mean, we humans in particular have advanced abilities, well, some of us, to weigh a lot of different concepts and ideas and choices, and combine a bunch of different concepts and make them into new concepts, synthesize them into new ideas, and to seek out new information from other sources and other people, and incorporate that into our concepts. And so we have a lot of advanced analytical skills that we can use to solve all of our problems. But the question is, do we actually have choice? Right? I mean, we have choice, yes, but do we have independent free will to choose? Right? Is there something beyond my biology, my genetic predisposition, and my biological wiring, and all the environmental inputs from the world and the universe affecting me in this moment? Is there anything to my consciousness beyond all those environmental inputs and my genetic inputs? There's no evidence whatsoever to suggest that there is. Not a shred. The best scientific evidence indicates to us that there is no soul, there is no independent free will, that you are simply the result. You have the ability to choose. Don't get me wrong. You can choose. You can choose a lot of different things. You can think about things, decide if you want to do something or not. But there's no independent free will to stop making that choice. That choice is being made by your brain as a result of inputs merely from your genetic predisposition and environment. That's the evidence. That's all we can confirm. Now, I'm not saying that an independent free will doesn't exist. I personally believe there is one. And I believe in a soul. I do. Can't prove it. I just feel it. That's beyond reason. That's what we call faith, right? Just like most people have, the majority of people, vast majority of people, I think the estimates vary, but anywhere between 80 to like 95% of people believe in a deity or a God. Now that number is only like about, in America, that number is only like 51% of scientists. Like in America, I think it's like 95% of people claim to believe in God. But that number for scientists is only 51%, right? Much lower, but still kind of impressive, right? For all the scientists, I mean, that's a big drop, 40%, almost 40% drop, 44% drop in people, scientists, believe a lot less in God than everybody else. But still, 51% of them in America they believe in a God. And I think that's because faith fills in the gaps, right? There's a lot of things that science can't answer, not because science is incapable. We just haven't come up with the information yet. If we had the information, we could probably reason it out. But there's just a lot of information that's not available to us. It may never be available to us. It may be beyond the reach of humanity. Or in time, it may not. Maybe someday we will discover a particle, or a subatomic particle that leads us to another dimension or a spiritual realm or some kind of proof of an independent free will. Right now, we got none of that. There's none of that there. There's only our belief that we've had for a very long time. The earliest evidence so far, I think the oldest ritualized burial site they discovered in Israel is about 100,000 years old. It was a burial site with a bunch of red ochre tools and items set ritualistically next to the different dead bodies in the gravesite area. And it looked very much like a ritual burial. which a lot of scientists think indicates belief in an afterlife, which makes sense. So we know that the afterlife concept's probably been around for a very long time, and very likely even perhaps much longer than that. So the question is, the concept of afterlife is so prevalent. People would say, well, it's because we sense that it's true, and is that true, or is it just a nice story that we told ourselves a long time ago to make sense of things before we had any understanding of science? Right? I mean, the moon would come out in different shapes, or it wouldn't come out, or the sun would come out and do crazy things with the moon, and we'd have to explain that with no understanding of science, or the weather would do crazy stuff, the volcano would erupt. We'd have to try and find some way to explain that. So we make up things, kind of similar to how we based off our understanding of the world around us, which is, if you're in some kind of a hunter-gatherer society, you're around other people doing things to other animals and other people, right? And you're going to kind of extrapolate that understanding of human interaction to the cosmos, to nature. You're going to create the idea of other gods or other beings that are being responsible for these storms and these meteorological events, these astronomical events, these hurricanes or natural disasters, the drought, the famine, whatever, that you come up with these mythological explanations because you had to find some way to explain it. And that's what our brains do, is they find a way to make sense of the world around us. And based off of extremely limited information, that's what we came up with to explain it, to get us through. Because we got to have some understanding of things simply to function. Simply to be like, okay, that makes sense, I'll keep going. Versus, this is crazy, I don't know how to cope because I don't know what's going on. You have to find some way to make sense of the world, to be able to function, operate, survive, and adapt. And that's what our advanced brains have evolved to do. And that is part of being creative, coming up with new ideas and new concepts. And it appears from the evidence that consciousness starts around birth, probably a little bit, shortly after birth, right? Probably right when they come out of the womb and they're forced initially to breathe. That very likely may be the first moment of consciousness at a very extremely basic level for infants, because they're basically anesthetized the whole time they're in the womb, and even the pain receptors haven't even been established in the posterior cortex. So even if parts of the body could experience some type of pain, the receptors haven't been set up in the posterior cortex for them to consciously experience pain. However, once they leave the womb, that changes. They become aware very quickly, and very gradually, very basic awareness at birth, and then gradually, they, by 18 months, maybe they can pass the mirror test and recognize themselves in the mirror, and then by about, typically they say around the age of 7, human children usually reach what they call the age of reason, or what they call adult consciousness, the ability to understand, not only their self and their world and their emotional state, their mental state, but also basic principles of reason. Like around 7 is typically when most children hit that stage. And then that consciousness continues through your life, but changes as you age. Your consciousness, your awareness of your existence does change over time. You have an identity, but that too changes over time. But then comes to an end when you die and your brain shuts off. And that is the end of your brain activity, and thus the end of your consciousness forever. So that's the scientific information up to this point. That's what we got. Now, there's more information, though, that's interesting to consider. There's a concept called panpsychism. Basically the idea behind panpsychism is that the universe is imbued with elements or aspects of consciousness. Not necessarily that the universe itself is conscious, but that it has intrinsic properties of consciousness that have in some manner manifest themselves in certain living organisms that are conscious of their experience. The idea behind this basically is that all matter has some type of behavior, even if it's not conscious of its experience, right? Like even like particles, atomic particles, subatomic particles, they have behavior based on certain things, but they're not aware of their behavior. But they do have experience. They just don't have awareness of that experience. But the idea behind panpsychism is that there is some type of intrinsic nature of consciousness that exists in the universe that explains our consciousness, and that intrinsic consciousness to some degree is present throughout the universe. Panpsychism, meaning there would be a trace of consciousness on some extremely nanofraction of a level in all things, in every atom and every subatomic particle. That this maybe consciousness and life or existence, even not just life, but all things in existence have some trace of consciousness. Not any kind of consciousness that you or I are aware of, but the smallest minute fraction of a consciousness, the seed of consciousness perhaps, that when finally combined in a much more advanced organism reaches our level of consciousness, right? There's no evidence to suggest that either, but the idea, it's an interesting concept, and the interesting thing about that idea is the search to sort of explain the intrinsic nature of consciousness and elements of consciousness, to try and explain why does pain hurt the way that it does. We know that pain largely functions as a defense mechanism to warn us, don't do that again, it's bad for you, right? As a reminder not to do things that can hurt you and kill you, right? But why does it feel that way, right? Why do the emotions feel the way they do, right? What is it that makes the colors that we see the colors that we see? We only see a small, teeny tiny, spectrum of light that exists. We see a very small sliver of that. But even that teeny tiny small sliver, what is it about, that part of the light spectrum that affects our consciousness the way that it does? And, what is it that makes those electrical activities happening go from just making automatic decisions without awareness, reflexively, doing things to protect yourself but not thinking about it, but then finally being aware of it and thinking about it and regretting the bad choice or savoring the victory? And it appears that comes, that consciousness is nothing more than an adaptation. That it's an adaptation that developed to keep life going. That it was just something that developed, and the more advanced animals got, the more advanced consciousness got to help animals survive. That it exists solely for the purpose. It's adaptive. It's adaptive to be aware. It's adaptive, even though it's painful and inconvenient to be aware, right? There's a lot of pain in being aware, like a psychological pain. There's a lot of hassle in having to make all these complicated choices. But it's more adaptive. It's more adaptive to be aware of the universe and the world around you, to be able to manage all the different threats and opportunities that come along. You can't do that if you're not aware of the world around you and aware of yourself and your mental state, your emotional state. The more aware you are of these things, the better you can control your choices. The choices that you make, whether a soul's involved with that or an independent free will is involved with that or not. It doesn't matter. You have to choose either way, right? That's the thing. I like believing in a soul. I always have. I'm probably always going to believe in a soul. But ultimately, it really doesn't matter. You have to choose. You have no choice. You're going to choose. You not choosing is a choice. You have to choose all the time. All living things do, right? But you have the ability for conscious choice to think about it, to deliberate about it, to choose different ways to go about it, right? Or to ask other people for their opinions, to read about it, to watch a show about it, or to not do anything about it. They're all choices, different options for you to weigh. And you have to make a determination. We all do. There is a mandate that we have from nature to survive. All living things, conscious or not, have a mandate from nature for some unknown reason, which we'll have to get to in another episode, to survive, to adapt, and to thrive, and to carry on their line to the next generation. And we don't know why that is, but the mandate is clear. Whether there's a God and a soul or not, the mandate is to survive and to thrive, and to do so by doing things the right way. And the right way is the smart way and the honorable way. The right way is the smart way because the smart way gets you, the smart strategic way tends to get you better results, right? The decent, honorable, honest way tends to get you the best results with people. There's no reason, we're going into the realm of human relations. We're talking about relations between people, not just relations between groups and the social contract between people and government, but the contractual relationship between individuals, how we get along in the world. There's no reason for you to trust me if I'm dishonest with you, right? There's no reason for you to work with me if I'm unreliable. It's more adaptive for me to be reliable. People will want to work with me and help me more. People will want to help me more if I'm kind than if I'm mean. Being mean and unkind might get me some short-term successes, but in the long term, it's a losing strategy. Mean people don't generally live as long as they're not as happy, right? And even if they do, they have to live with low-quality friends or people who aren't their friends who are just around them for the money or for some other reason beyond friendship because they don't like them because they're mean, right? There's a reason why things are right and wrong, right? Most of the time, it's wrong to kill people, right? Because if it's just right to go out and kill someone for no reason, then it's right for them to come and do that to you. So if you're okay with doing that to someone else, you have to be okay with them doing it to you. If you're fine with that, okay? But we know that's wrong. No one wants to be killed, right? No one wants to suffer. If you want to be safe, you have to be willing to treat other people with safety if you want them to treat you with safety. If you want to be treated with kindness, it's an exchange. It's an exchange, an agreement, and a cooperative agreement to get along. And you can choose to violate that and to hurt people and to get some kind of a short-term gain. But it always is a losing proposition. It not only hurts other people, but it hurts you as well in the long term. You're affected by it in numerous ways. That's why we know it's wrong, whether there's a God or a soul or religion is correct or not. And I'm not here to ding faith because I think faith is fine as long as it doesn't lead you in funky directions. I mean, faith exists beyond reason. Faith, I think, is useful to fill in the gaps where reason doesn't always provide the answers. Sometimes, and it's not to criticize reason, it's just sometimes we can't reason things out if we don't have all the information. There's just not enough information and we can't figure it out and we need something else to fill in the gap. And faith is good for that for a lot of people, and I think it can be very helpful. As long as it doesn't lead you to do anything crazy or harmful to yourself or other people. If that's the case, you might have to re-examine your faith or your interpretation in your faith. So perhaps faith, in spirituality and God, perhaps it's just a beautiful lie. We have no way to be sure, right? That's why it's called faith, right? If we had proof, it wouldn't be called faith. It's faith because we have no hard evidence. We have no proof of it. We just choose to believe it because it helps us. It's what we want to believe. And that's, there's nothing wrong with that. If it helps you, do it. Do it. It may be true. It may be true. And we just don't have the information yet, that there's so much information. We've just begun to study scientifically, rigorously study this, the world and the universe in the last, 400 or 500 years. Our technology is just only becoming advanced, what we consider really advanced in the last 100 years or so. There's just so much more we've yet to discover. And they've discovered a lot about trees too. Now, I'm not saying that trees are conscious, but the trees can communicate, right? They can through their roots, and even if the roots don't connect, they can communicate their electrical signals that they send at about 1/3 an inch per minute. Trees can send electrical signals to each other through their root systems that connect to each other. And even if they don't touch each other, they can connect through. Generally, there's lots of fungi around that operate as almost like an internet, a network that carries those electrical impulses from the roots to the fungi to the other trees. And so trees can communicate. They'll even extend their roots to trees that have been felled, and they'll keep stumps alive for hundreds of years after they've been chopped down or fallen. Now, that's not to say they're conscious of their experience, aware of it, but they do sense the world around them, right? They do different things to survive, right? They do cooperate with each other because they will share nutrients throughout their root system, and they will allocate more nutrients to a sick tree when a tree is sick, and then dial back those nutrients once the tree gets well. Now, does that mean they're conscious of this? I mean, it could just be this is, genetic programming, genetic tree root programming that's existed for millions or hundreds of millions of years. The culmination of, billions of years of plant evolution, and this is what you've got. Is that they're able to sense things, but not consciously be aware of them. They don't have brains, right? But they have some experience of their existence as far as that they sense it. Like a bacteria. Bacterium can sense the world around them, but there's no evidence that they're thinking about it and feeling about it. They're like a single-celled organism. It has different receptors that sense different things and tell its body to do this or do that, but there's no evidence that it's aware of that. It's a single-celled organism. It's sensing things arguably similar to how a computer or a machine might. Computers can sense things. Machines with sensors can sense things, but they're not aware. They're not conscious. They can sense things, but they're not consciously aware of their experience, of their existence. They can't feel pain. They can't think original thoughts. They can't do any of that. And so it doesn't appear that plants are aware, although they appear they do a lot of interesting things. There's a lot more cooperation. They have families. They do make sacrifices for each other. It is pretty interesting. There's a lot more to the lives of trees. There's a great book called The Secret Life of Trees by Peter Wohlleben, who's a German forestry expert. Excellent book that talks a lot about what he's learned working in forests, and how trees do much better in forests together. They work together. They do much better in a forest. Trees by themselves don't do as well, and that trees that are planted, agricultural trees that are just like farmed, don't do nearly as well, and have a hard time communicating with other trees because their roots have been damaged, and they don't necessarily have that intricate fungal system to communicate with either. So, interesting stuff about trees and how they live. Doesn't appear at this point that they're aware in any way. How could they be? They don't have a brain, unless, right? Okay, right? If we go the other way and we say, okay, let's insist there is an independent will, or there is some kind of a soul. Is there a soul in the tree? I mean, if there's a soul attached to a human body or human brain, could it be attached to a tree too? Could it be attached to bacteria? I mean, if you can just slap a soul on anything, then a soul could be, yeah, on anything. So who knows? Who knows? Scientifically, like I said, there's no evidence that a soul exists, but it's still an appealing concept to us. We like to believe that we have this independent will that is part of the choosing process, but it may not be true. There's no hard evidence that it exists, other than that our belief it exists. Same as like an afterlife or a soul, that there's just no evidence beyond our belief that it's real. Now there are those near-death experiences, right? But there's always alternative explanations for them, like depending on the situation and the ailment, that it could be the brain losing brain cells, from depleted oxygen, brain cells dying, or it could be the brain misfiring, or two different parts of the brain misperceiving the information and making you perceive that you're floating when you're not. It could also be a lot of the stuff they said where people report seeing things. There have been some instances where people have reported fairly accurately, like what the doctors were saying during the procedure, and like we're able to describe certain things, like the drill, the drill cracking your skull open sounded like, what it looked like. But those could have been, the brain could have absorbed that information during anesthesia. That may not have been. It's hard to confirm. Did what you perceive happen? Did what you experienced happen? There was something happening to them consciously. There was a conscious experience going on there of some sort, right? But was that actually outside of your body while your brain was dead, or while your heart was stopped and your brain activity was zero, or did that happen during anesthesia, right? Or is a lot of this you making sense of after you are coming out of anesthesia? So it's hard to confirm. There are some interesting cases where people being able to describe a lot of interesting things that were said during, like within the operating room. Most scientists are still skeptical of this, and medical professionals, but there are those who believe, there are some people who believe in near-death experiences and do believe that there is a consciousness that exists outside the body. Scientists, there's neuroscientists who believe this now. They're in a minority. There are neuropsychiatrists in a minority who believe this too. There's one in particular that Dr. Peter Fenwick, who talked about. He's a neuropsychiatrist, and he has this belief. He was initially a skeptic about near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences, but over 50 years of working and interviewing people who've had these experiences, he became converted, believes in it, and he believes that there is a universal consciousness that exists. And that it's like a principle or a fundamental principle of the universe, an element of the universe that exists. And he doesn't call it God, but that consciousness simply is a property of the universe, like gravity or dark matter or dark energy. That consciousness too is an intrinsic property of the universe. And that our brain is merely a filter for this universal consciousness. So that similar to, he describes it in a way like this, that the way our eyes can only pick up a small piece of the spectrum of light, and our ears can only pick up a small spectrum of the audio spectrum, that our brain only picks up a small spectrum of the universal consciousness. And it acts as a filter for the global consciousness, and only lets a certain amount in, probably the amount your brain can handle. The brain as a filter for consciousness. Now that's fascinating. That's really cool. Zero evidence to support that. But that's the conclusion, like physical evidence. But that's the conclusion that he reached after working for 50 years with people reporting these near-death experiences. And he believes that the idea of self ultimately is something of an illusion. Obviously, we are individual selves operating in individual bodies, but that we are connected to this universal consciousness that we're only temporarily using this filter that will be returned to when we die. That when we die, our consciousness continues on. It just goes back to the universal consciousness. That's a pretty comforting idea, and I like it. It sounds good to me, and it makes a lot of sense. And it would explain the near-death experiences where people talking about going to the warm, loving light and seeing their relatives, and all that stuff. That happens to about 10 to maybe 15% of people who come back from the dead, like cardiac arrest patients or whatever. It's a small percentage. Most people don't, when they have a near-death experience, or when they die and come back, they don't report a near-death experience. They don't report an out-of-body experience. That's a very small number of people. One more thing I'm going to say about consciousness. They have also determined that people who have brain damage, and it's not all of them, but some people who have brain damage who are in a vegetative state or in a coma are conscious. They've been able to determine through experiments, through like different magnetic impulses, and also from asking them questions, and asking them to perform certain tasks, and then monitoring their brain activity in a brain scanner, like to say, okay, play tennis, and the part of your brain that plays tennis lights up, and you say, okay, go cook something, and the part of your brain that would cook something lights up. And they've done that enough to be able to say reliably that they know that there are, a certain number. It's a minority, but there are those people that are in a vegetative state or in a coma that are still conscious, but they cannot communicate with the outside world. They're in there, they're aware of their existence and their current experience, but they cannot communicate with us. They're trapped in there. So that has major implications, a major need for research to develop a new understanding of this and to develop new technologies and medicines to find a way to free these people who are trapped. They're not brain dead. I mean, some of them appear to be. A good number of them appear to be brain dead and are not responsive to any kind of magnetic pulses to the brain, or to the posterior cortex, or to verbal questions. A lot of them are unresponsive, but not all of them. Some are alive and they're aware, mentally alive. The evidence supports this. Obviously, we can't talk to them because they're stuck in there, but we can see the brain activity that's going on at a level of a conscious person. It's just, it cannot be communicated out to us outwardly in any fashion. It appears outwardly they're dead. They're not moving. Their eyes may be open and they're breathing, but there's no outward response or reaction whatsoever, or maybe minimally responsive, like a catatonic state. But it appears like nothing's going on the inside. But we know that for a number of these people, this is not true. They are aware. They're sentient. They can respond to our questions. So this is a major implication that consciousness, does continue in people in a vegetative state for a certain number of people. So that underscores the importance for the need for more research in this area, definitely. But we've talked about a lot. It's a really complex topic. I could go on forever about it. It appears that life and consciousness are inextricably linked at some point, that once life becomes advanced enough to develop consciousness to adapt, that's what it does. But like I said before, you got to make the choices to make good ones. You got to make choices to survive and adapt, whether God's out there watching you or not. I believe he is. And I think perhaps, maybe the reason we like to believe, it could be a beautiful lie, right? That's just that we've been buying into for so long that it's just comfortable to do so. But it could also be, and there's no physical evidence for either, so let me just put forth my untestable concept, not a theory, is that perhaps there's an imprint. If there is another realm beyond our vision, another dimension, another world somewhere else, or that occupies this space at another frequency, that we just can't detect it, that we don't have the tools yet. And maybe someday that will change. Or maybe it won't. Maybe there's a permanent veil there that's here for a reason, the same reason that life exists, which is a mystery. Well, we're going to have to get to that at some point, because I think the question of consciousness is inextricably linked with the question of life. It appears from the best available evidence the whole purpose of consciousness is merely an adaptation for us to continue to live. So the ultimate question to me is not so much about consciousness. It just seems to be, an advanced adaptation to survive, to this ability to choose and deliberate and to make advanced decisions and to think about things, and to come up with different ways and to feel bad about things so you don't do them again, and to remember them, right? And to try and retain those memories as a lesson, right? To remember those bad things, those painful experiences, as a reminder not to repeat them again, right? That we developed a brain for that adaptive reason. Okay. But maybe too, that there's a genetic imprint as an unyet detected that exists within our genes, of some, unseen knowledge, some imprint in every gene of organic life, perhaps, that drives life. That's the question. Why does life, not only why does life exist, how did it come about? We know that you need water. Okay, but one, what's the magic combo that makes it happen every time? We don't know. And two, why does it try so hard? Why does life try so hard to keep going? Why does it fight so hard to adapt, to learn, to grow, to not die out? Why does life care to live? To live so much that it fights over billions of years to keep going and to change, to start from a single-celled organism and eventually evolve all the way up to us. Why does it do that? No reason? Okay. Well, we got to look for that reason. We got to look. I mean, maybe there's no reason. Obviously there's no evidence to explain that, but we got to look. That's pretty fascinating. Why does it try so hard? Why does life try so hard to live? Why not just let it go, man? Why put up the fight? Why do we want to live so bad? All right, here's kind of a morbid thing. Only 4% of people, I think last year, the year before, there's only about 4% of Americans reported feeling serious thoughts of suicide. Yeah, it might be a little higher than that, but that's a pretty small number, right? 4%, that means 96% of people, assuming that's roughly accurate, but let's just say it's, in the ballpark, that the overwhelming majority of people don't seriously consider suicide as a serious option, in spite of all the challenges of life. How difficult and horrible life can be sometimes. We all have some bad moments. Sometimes it can be really awful, and the vast majority of us just choose to keep going on. Don't even think about. Not only do most of us, the overwhelming majority of us choose to keep going on. The overwhelming majority of us don't even choose to think about it as a serious option. We're not even interested in it as a way out. We want to keep living for as long as we can. We want to live forever. A lot of us, some of us do. I don't, but that seems like a drag, really. I mean, I could see living for maybe a couple hundred years or a few hundred, but I don't know. We'll have to do a show about that. That's a lot of living. Yeah, that's a lot of work. I guess you could stay young, right? And if it was like a really privileged existence, but if it's a tough life, do you really want to live forever? I'm ready. I want to go see God, man. I want to go and tell me I did a good job, right? But he may not be there, right? And there may not be nowhere to go, right? It may just be curtains. When you die, it's like when you go to that deep sleep and there's no brain activity, there's nothing going on in that sleep. There's no dreaming, and you just dream for that. It's that eternal sleep, no dreams forever. And maybe that's true. There's nothing after all this. And if that's the case, though, our line carries on, life carries on, and we made some contribution to that. Again, I believe in something. I believe in an independent will, and studies have actually shown that people who do believe in independent free will typically tend to perform better in their work and tend to report being happier. It's not true for everybody, but that's a general tendency that it seems to be more adaptable for people to believe they have an independent free will involved in their choosing. You are choosing. Choice is not a myth. That's not correct. You do have choice. The question is whether you have an independent free will involved in that choice, or if you are merely choosing based on the computing of your environment and genetic preferences. Right? So that's the only question. What is the origin of choice? And so far, it just looks like it's genes and environment. But we'll see. It feels like we're making a choice. Think about things. I don't know. I want to do this. Maybe I want to do that. Now, what do you think? Right? Feels like I'm really thinking about it. Like I'm really working hard. Because you are. You're thinking, doing these different concepts. But is that your soul driving that? Or is that just, your brain doing its job? Doing a job it's been programmed to do for millions of years. Right? I don't know. That's the hard part about faith. Right? And, not everybody needs faith. Some people are fine not believing in God. It doesn't bother them in the least. Right? They're totally good with that. But I think most people do want and need to believe in some kind of a higher power or some kind of an independent free will, independent soul or agency that's separate from just biological determinism, right? That the biology and environment determine everything. And determinism is actually gaining steam in psychiatry and in neuroscience. So they're becoming more convinced that there's no soul and it's just all environment and genetics, right? Okay. That's because that's totally understandable. They have to base all their information off evidence. But the rest of us have to live in the world, right? Like I said, 51% of American scientists still believe in God anyway. In spite of all of the scientific evidence they've seen, none of it proving a God exists, they still choose to believe one anyway. Because a lot of us just need to believe in one to fill in the gaps, right? Just don't let that faith take you in any jacked up directions, all right? Because then it's not adaptive anymore. So, a lot of good stuff. I could keep going. I'm going to let you go. It's a fascinating topic. We're coming back again. This is part one. We really wanted to try and give you the goods, give you a nice spectrum regarding consciousness, not just looking at humans and some animals, but looking at, bacteria and plants as well, and the nature of the universe and its intrinsic nature, and how might this relate to consciousness. We've just scratched the surface. We tried to give you a nice, good long scratch, and I hope it gives you some good stuff to think about. But whatever the case is, take heart. You do have choice. You have choice and you have reason to survive and to fight and to thrive. Use it. Use it and max it out to the fullest, because that's what nature, the universe, God, or what you want to call it, wants you to do, has mandated you to do, regardless of what you want to call it. Who it is that directed us to live and to fight to live and to go on. We have been given a command by nature and very much apparently want to survive and thrive. So do it the right way. Do it the right way. Work with people in a positive way to have a more positive experience for yourself and others. You know from your experience, when you give to others, they give back. You don't want to be foolish and give all your stuff away to people recklessly, but give wisely, judiciously, strategically, and helpfully, honestly. And those things do typically, not always, but over time, come back to you. People want to help helpful people, right? People want to help kind people. People want to work with honorable, reasonable people, not difficult, selfish, dishonest people. Now, those people can score for a little while, but it does end up generally burning them in the long run, overall, as far as their long-term happiness and well-being, which is what you're really shooting for, I think. Long-term happiness and well-being. So make the good, smart, moral choices. Treat others in the way that you would like to be treated, or in the way, honestly, that they would like to be treated. Treat people the way they want to be treated, within reason, right? Don't get carried away. If what they want's reasonable, yeah, give it to them. It's really about respect, respecting other people, and that exchange. It's like so much of our existence is just an exchange. Our social existence with each other is contractual exchanges. I agree to talk to you about this and to listen to you, and you agree to listen to me. I agree to help you and work with you, and you agree to work with me. I agree to be your friend and help you out when you need it, and you agree to do that. There's an agreement. And as long as we uphold that, we can maintain that relationship, right? But if somebody screws up and violates that agreement, does something wrong, that can damage the relationship. That's why you don't do things that are wrong, because it hurts people and it hurts you because you're connected to other people, right? Because we're affected not only by our own choices, but we're affected by the choices of others. And they're affected by our choices, which in turn affects us. We are interconnected. We are interrelated. Our choices do matter, and they do make a difference. So make good, smart, moral decisions. And don't worry about whether you have a soul or not, because the right thing is still the right thing either way. So that's it for this episode of The Breakdown. I thank you for coming along for the ride and the meandering journey that it was. I hope it was meaningful to you. We're going to have a really good conversation come up in a few days with a man named David Scott. He's got a very interesting background. We're going to talk about the global fascist movement underway, most disturbingly in the United States. We're going to talk about it from a number of different perspectives, and his interesting background and experience, I think, will shed a lot of interesting light on the topic. So I look forward to talking to you in just a few days about that. And until then, take good care of yourself. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.